Did you forget to buy dinner rolls for the big feast? Don't worry, it's a silver lining. It just means you got to make them yourself with your own hands, a big heavy pan, and to make them special for the holidays, a whole lot of cheese. Stick around, I'll explain. Hey stirring creatures, I'm Mr. Spork, and these are Mr. Spork's hands. It's the night before Christmas. Happy holidays, everybody. The weather outside is definitely frightful. It's minus 10 Celsius out my door at the moment. But do not fret if you find yourself in a similar situation with a blizzard headed your way and you don't want to get out and drive to the store for the dinner rolls you forgot to buy. If you don't have any in the house, it's a silver lining because that means now you got to make them yourself. But it is one of the simplest and easiest recipes for baking on record. I guarantee you after you've made this twice you'll have the recipe memorized. I'm going to make a simple basic version and then I'm going to show you how to level it up for Christmas. But we'll get to that in just a minute. The only piece of equipment you need to make this work is a nice heavy cast iron pan. This happens to be one of my old pans. I think I paid 12 bucks for this more than 30 years ago. That dates not only me but also the pan. But you can still to this day get a cast iron skillet like this for between 20 and 25 bucks at any big box store out there. It is not celebrity endorsed. It is not super polished Kickstarter cast iron. This is just your stock standard. I'd call this the old-fashioned country shape. You see that the sides are mostly straight. They flare out just a little bit. Mine happens to have pour spouts, just things to look for. But cast iron is a big story for a whole other video. If you guys want to see that, leave me some comments down below. Notice that these high sides are going to give me a good solid lift, but something like this is one of my newer pans where it's with the curved sides, wouldn't do that. So that's the only thing that you really want to look for, if you will, a baking cast iron pan, is to get some straight sides like this. To get started, we have to weigh our ingredients. If you have not gotten the message yet from watching my other baking videos, get yourself a scale that's accurate. It's the only way to reproduce results. For this, we're going to do 500 grams of high protein flour. Now, I'm lucky, I've talked about this before, but in Canada we use hard winter wheat, which kind of naturally makes a good high protein flour. I think this one ticks out at something like 13.5, maybe even 14%. I haven't done the math on it lately, but I'm aiming for 500 grams here. Now I need 300 milliliters of warm tap water, which is conveniently 300 grams. I always weigh my water because it's just a little bit more accurate. Can I get 1 gram in there? Yay, 300 grams exactly. And I always do a real quick check. You don't want the water any hotter than 120, 115. It's pretty warm. I might even let it cool down a minute. But if you don't have a thermometer, the way to tell, you stick your finger in. If you go, ah, that's right. If you go, ah, then that's too hot. You want that cool because you don't want to hurt the yeast. This is a 1 teaspoon measure. If I forget to tell you on any of these others, I'm going to do a full 2 teaspoons. We're going to get a real big lift of yeast, that's fast-acting yeast that's in there. We're going to do a full teaspoon of salt, but instead of putting that in with the yeast, which might injure it or hurt it or inhibit it, we're going to go into the flour with that. And normally I would put in just a teaspoon of sugar into the bread flour as well, but since it's right here and since I have hot water that will do a good job of melting it, I'm going to go with a couple teaspoons of honey. Pardon the camera blocking. So just a little bit of honey. I think it feeds the yeast a bit and makes me feel good about the sugar I put in there. Don't hesitate to use regular sugar if you have to. Stir that, leave it alone until it gets nice and foamy. Be about 10 minutes. While I'm waiting a few minutes for that yeast to really wake up, I'll remind you that the way to buy your yeast is not in the little tiny packets. Those are way too expensive by weight. It's not even in these larger jars you sometimes see at the grocery store, because those are still not the best buy. The way to do it, go to the restaurant supply store and get yourself a big 1 pound bulk pack. Literally, I paid less than $4 Canadian for a pound of yeast. I think this, which is a quarter pound, was something in the $6 to $7 range, and I don't even want to do the math on the little envelopes. Buy your yeast in bulk. So that yeast is coming out of hibernation well. I'm back from melting 50 grams of unsalted butter, and to that 50 grams, that's about 3 tablespoons. I've switched my spoon now to a tablespoon measure. I want to add a tablespoon, if it'll come out, of olive oil to that mix. The blend, as you will see where I'm going to put this, will help it from burning. So just a tablespoon there. Could you use all olive oil? Absolutely. Could you use all butter? Probably, but again, I like the way the olive oil butter behaves when I use some of it to top later. Gonna give this a quick stir, and all but 1 tablespoon, I'm gonna save that 1 tablespoon. The rest of it goes into my butter. That butter had cooled just a bit, so it's not gonna hurt the yeast. Give that a quick stir. Gonna stir in that salt, and then all of this goes right into the center. And we are in good shape. Get it moistened, and then switch to your spurtle. People have seen my spurtle before. I even had a couple of comments that they, one woman commented she was obsessed with my spurtle, and I had to tell her it was a regular spatula that I had whittled down myself. So all I'm doing here is getting the flour moist, and then I'm going to do an auto-lyse or auto-lyse, depending on how you pronounce it. I've heard it both ways, and that simply means walking away from this for about 10 minutes so that all that moisture gets hydrated into the flour, and so you can get your cat to stop licking the olive oil bottle. Jeez, now I got to go sanitize this, you silly thing. While that dough hydrates, I promised you guys some special additions for the holidays. The first one is rosemary. I just pulled a few sprigs out of my herb closet. Yes, I have an herb closet. If you guys want to hear about that, leave me a comment down below and I'll do a herb closet hydroponic video. But all I got to do is mince this really, really fine, and then scoop that up and sprinkle it into the dough. It will get worked in as soon as we start kneading. Now that the dough is nicely hydrated, it's time to attack it with our hands. One of the best dollars you will ever spend is one of these little plastic dough scrapers because it bends and flexes to fit into your bowl. Speaking of, I knead in the bowl just because it's easier and less mess, and I don't have to clean up the counter afterwards. So I'm just going to scrape down the sides and then in with my nice clean hands. So here after the first minute, the temptation for rookie bakers is always to throw in some more flour or water, depending on whether or not it's too dry or too wet. Don't do it. Just give it more time. Keep kneading. Don't worry about these little bits. They will get picked up soon enough. So there you go, that was about 5 or 6 minutes worth of hand kneading. As you saw, it went through not only the dry stage, but the sticky stage. Just keep working it. It will work out. If it gets on your fingers, don't worry. Ultimately, it'll get to this stage where it's sticky, but it doesn't stick to your hand. Don't worry about it. Now, all I need to do is oil the bowl with my newly sanitized bottle of olive oil. Silly cats. Just a little bit of oil. And the reason, again, you do that is so that it will slide right up the sides of the bowl. So make sure you get a little bit of oil around the sides. Now we need to cover it, half to keep it from being disturbed by air and half to keep it from being disturbed by cats. And in my case, since it's so cold outside, it's kind of chilly in the kitchen too. So I'm going to go into my oven. I'm going to turn the oven on 350 for literally 60 seconds. Don't forget and leave it on. That'll just make a nice warm proofing space for the dough. We need this to double in size, probably about 45 minutes to an hour. Remember, we got a lot of yeast in there. While that dough rises, let's talk about the other ingredients you can add for a special holiday indulgent. I am, of course, talking about cheese. Oh, good, glorious, gooey, melty cheese. The dough ball weighed about 850 grams. I'm going to put almost 200 grams of cheese into this. And I've got a mix here. I've got some cheddar. I like the flavor of cheddar, but it's not a great melting cheese. I've got some mozzarella, which is a great melting cheese, and I've got some Swiss, which is both melting and delicious flavor. So about a third each to make up 200 grams to go into that 850 gram loaf. You could use a little less or a little more, whatever you think you'll get away with. I've tried using shredded cheese in this, and quite frankly, the shredded cheese just kind of gets lost. It's still cheesy, but it's not decidedly cheesy, noticeably cheesy. I've actually done this enough times that I've experimented with cube size, And the perfect size for me is about 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter. Any bigger than that and it gets too gluey and gobby and it won't rise properly. Any smaller than that and kind of like the shredded cheese, it gets lost. So dice up some cheese if you're in the mood to go into these rolls. Psst, hey buddy, you could also use all mozzarella. Dice up some pepperoni, make a tomato dipping sauce, change up the herbs a little bit, but that's a whole other video. Let me know if you want to see it in the comments down below. The other thing you can do while your dough rises is prep your pan. Get out your best kitchen geometry and cut yourself a circle of parchment paper. Make sure it's big enough not only to cover the bottom, but to go up the sides, because those buns are going to go straight up the side. If you want to hold it down, you can just do a couple fingertips of butter, and boom, that's kind of like glue. You're ready to go. Just so you know, this is a 10.5 inch, probably called an 11-inch pan. I made the dough recipe a little bit bigger than I need. I usually end up with about 1/2 a bun of dough left over. Your pan, of course, will be a little bit different. You may end up with enough dough to make a separate one, but don't crowd the pan because you want to take that extra, maybe put it on the side on a piece of foil or something as a chef's treat. Don't crowd the pan because if you want light and airy, they need room to rise. After about an hour, the yeast has proven its worth and we have doubled in size for the dough ball. I want to punch it down, of course, like you usually do. And now in with the glorious cheese. I've tried saving some of the cheese balls and just trying to fold them into each roll as I go. Really not necessary. I'm just going to fold it in. Believe me, they will get mixed up as you completely work the dough. It's a lot of cheese, trust me. But you see it gets in there as part of the punch down process. Now you could go and scale this and measure out each ball individually to make sure you get them uniform, but really just not that necessary. All I'm gonna do, get my bowl out of the way here now, is come in and make dough balls about, oh geez, I don't know what to call them, bigger than a golf ball, something like that. Smaller than a baseball, bigger than a golf ball. I don't know. The idea here is in your pan, you basically want half dough and half empty space because the rolls are going to rise into that. Maybe a little smaller than that first one. They don't really have to be that equal because you're going to fill the whole pan with rolls and probably even have a little left over. If you want to tighten up each of these dough balls, just take it under a cupped hand and roll it. It tightens up the skin, the surface tension, I guess, on the bun a little bit. It's kind of like making Chinese bao, which is another video I got to make for you guys. Let me know if you want to see that. Get it all tucked in, and you'll notice, again, about half of the space is empty because these are going to rise up and completely fill this pan. We'll come back to this in about an hour, hour and 20 minutes or so. After about 75 minutes of effort from my millions of yeast minions, you can see they've done their job. The rolls have risen to completely fill the pan. That's what we want. And that's no small feat with all that extra cheese in there. But if you give it the extra time and give it the right environment, nice and warm, no drafts, no cat paws poking at it, they will get there in the end. If you were making a batch without cheese, probably only an hour or so of rising time is what you need. But once they're nice and puffy like this, you're ready to go into the oven. The oven, I've got it in unusually high 450 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 235 degrees Celsius. The idea is that this cast iron is cold, and the reason we're using cast iron is that it holds heat, but we got to have the heat to pump into it. So nice and hot for a preheat. It's going to go in for only about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to knock the heat down all the way to 400 Fahrenheit, 205 Celsius. And that will be the baking temperature for another, say, 8 to 10 minutes. Spin the pan front to back, and then probably another 8 to 10 minutes after that. You've got a total time of between 20 and 25 minutes. The only way to tell when they're done, really, is to do an internal temperature, and you want that internal temperature to be around 210 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 degrees Celsius, something like that. So use your thermometer to its full advantage. You probably thought that I forgot about that last extra dose of delicious butter. I did not. So here's what you want to do with that last tablespoon. Remember, there's just a little bit of oil mixed in there. That'll keep the butter from burning too far, but it is literally that delicious and easy. I'm going to get my big, huge silicone pastry brush and brush them. These are going into the oven right now. Here we are out of the oven. It was a total of about 25 minutes for me this time. The only way to tell, though, as I say, is to take a temperature, and I'm going to take the temperature right at the center. We're at 210 Fahrenheit. That's just exactly where I want them. These are still cooking because remember that cast iron holds heat. So leave them alone. I've got a rack underneath just so air circulates, but not going to touch them for another 10-15 minutes. I should also have mentioned that if you've got a spare on the side, it'll be done anywhere from 5 to 6 minutes early, and you might also get some cheese blowout. Not a problem in the pan because the pan holds the cheese in, but cooking on its own, this extra, what's a little Bernie cheese between friends? With just a little bit of cooling, it's okay to go ahead now, if you want, with some extra butter. Not necessary, but it's delicious and pretty. Just glaze them with a little bit of extra butter on top. You don't want to do that when it's really hot because you want that top crust to sit just a bit in the cool air. Okay, we've had 10 minutes of cooling in the pan. Let's move them over and get them out onto the rack directly. This is why the parchment is so handy. You can see I've pretty much already devoured the spare roll while I was waiting for the rest to cool. You get a little bit of cheese leakage, but hey, you know, Bernie cheese is delicious. I think those are ideal. Let's pick one. Let's pick this slightly wonky looking one here to pull out for you guys. Still warm and toasty, and I'm going to open it up, and there is that cheesy goodness. Still light and fluffy around the cheese. That's getting that cube size just right. These are delicious. If you eat them straight out of the pan, if you make them with cheese, without cheese, if you split them open and fill them with country ham and fried eggs for a breakfast sandwich, they are your go-to roll. I know it seems like a lot of steps, but it's really only about 10 minutes of hands-on and a lot of waiting in between. Invest in a good timer between the stages and you'll do great. I do hope you make a batch of these, not only for your holiday, but for a random day in the middle of June. If you're watching this in March, happy St. Patrick's Day. Make some rolls. If you make a batch of these and they turn out great, please leave me a comment down below because I love hearing success stories and I read each and every one of them. If you make a batch and they don't turn out so great, leave me a comment down below. We'll diagnose together and see if we can't get you across the finish line together. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you. Every view, every like, every subscribe, every social share, every time you tell people that the crazy Canadian's cooking again. All of that stuff adds up to allow me to keep doing this for you. If you have a few seconds in your very busy day to watch the random ad that runs after this, that throws a few pennies directly in my pocket. That really is the fuel for this fire, and I might even be able to buy the cat her own bottle of olive oil. As always, I am Mr. Spork, and these are Mr. Spork's hands. Now, I gotta go try to find some more butter. Maybe even some honey. There's some around here someplace. You dork. You're not supposed to be up there.